How could a map drawn more than 500 years ago depict coastlines with a precision that would not be officially measured until the age of satellites? Why do certain charts from the early modern world display lands that, according to accepted timelines, should not have been known, visited, or even imagined? These are not decorative illustrations, nor symbolic tapestries. They are technical documents. They were drawn with rulers, compasses, and mathematical intent. They were meant to be used by sailors, merchants, and states. And yet, when examined today, some of these maps appear to contain information that arrives far too early. In archives across Europe and the Middle East, preserved on parchment and vellum, there are maps that seem quietly out of place in their own century. Coastlines align where they should not. Land masses appear where official history says there was only ocean. Distances feel calculated, not guessed. This presents a measurable contradiction. Not a legend, not a myth, a problem of timing. Cartography, especially before the 18th century, was constrained by known limits. Latitude could be measured with some confidence. Longitude could not. Coastlines were often distorted, stretched, or compressed by weeks of dead reckoning. Entire continents were misaligned. Errors were common, expected, and visible. And yet, within this landscape of uncertainty, a small number of maps stand apart. They do not look confused. They do not look speculative. They look deliberate. Some show South American coastlines that follow the continental curve with unusual accuracy. Others depict large southern landmasses without the ice that now defines them. A few present polar regions not as blank spaces, but as structured environments with rivers, islands, and internal symmetry. Historians do not agree on what this means. Some argue these maps copied earlier sources now lost to time. Others suggest coincidence, exaggeration, or later interpretation imposed by modern eyes. Still others point to the possibility of cumulative knowledge, gathered piecemeal, passed hand to hand, and slowly refined outside official records. What is clear is this: these maps do not behave as we expect maps from their era to behave. They ask uncomfortable questions about how knowledge travels, how it disappears, and how easily timelines can fracture when a single document refuses to fit. Tonight, we will examine 5 such maps, not as proof of forbidden histories, not as evidence of lost civilizations, but as artifacts that sit quietly at the edge of certainty, where documentation ends and interpretation begins. They are not shouting secrets. They are whispering discrepancies. And sometimes, those whispers are more unsettling than any legend ever could be. Usually, questions like these are designed to keep the mind alert. They invite debate, speculation, and restless curiosity. They encourage us to search for answers, to resolve contradictions, to stay awake. But tonight is different. Tonight, we will not rush to conclusions. We will not attempt to solve these mysteries or force them into certainty. Instead, we will move slowly, calmly, with patience. This is not a fast-paced investigation. It is a quiet passage through history, guided by observation rather than urgency. You are invited to listen without effort, to let curiosity soften rather than sharpen. Imagine yourself stepping into a silent archive. The room is large but hushed. Tall shelves rise into shadow, lined with rolled parchment and leather-bound atlases. The air is cool and still, carrying the faint scent of paper, ink, and time. Lamps glow softly above long wooden tables, their light resting gently on the surfaces of ancient maps. Here, nothing demands your attention. Nothing needs to be remembered. There is no test at the end of this journey. As you listen, your breathing can slow. Your focus can widen. You do not need to hold on to every detail. The mind is free to drift, knowing the story will continue whether it follows closely or not. These maps have waited centuries to be seen. They are in no hurry. We will examine them one by one, allowing their lines, symbols, and silences to speak at their own pace. Some questions will remain open. Some contradictions will stay unresolved. That is not a failure. It is part of the experience. For now, the doors of the archive close softly behind you. The outside world grows distant. And the first map is already waiting, spread carefully across the table, its edges worn smooth by time. The first map lies open beneath the lamp. It is incomplete, its edges uneven, as though time itself decided where the story should end. The surface is animal skin, faintly textured, slightly warped by centuries of humidity and handling. The ink has softened into tones of brown and red, no longer sharp, but still precise enough to guide the eye. At first, nothing feels unusual. The western coast of Africa curves downward in a familiar arc. The Iberian Peninsula rests near the edge of the known world. Trade routes are implied rather than declared. Across the Atlantic, land rises again. The eastern coastline of South America appears, marked with names, notes, and careful contour lines that suggest intention rather than improvisation. As the eye lingers, a subtle tension begins to form. This coastline does not feel guessed. The bulge of the continent follows a curve that later maps would confirm. Certain bays and river mouths appear where experience suggests they should be. The spacing between landmarks feels measured. The proportions feel restrained, as though correction has already taken place. This invites a gentle question. At the beginning of the 16th century, detailed surveys of this region did not yet exist. Navigators worked with incomplete instruments. Longitude drifted unpredictably. Storms erased certainty. Entire journeys could shift a coastline by hundreds of miles on paper. Errors were common, expected, visible, and yet, here, the errors feel minimized. Along the margins of the map, small notes appear in careful script. They do not celebrate discovery. They describe a process of gathering, of assembling. The map was drawn, according to its creator, from many older charts. Some came from Portuguese sailors, others from Arabic traditions. A few are described as far older still. These earlier sources are not named. None survive. But the claim itself is revealing. This map may not represent a single moment of observation, but a long accumulation of partial knowledge, fragments passed between cultures, copied by hand, adjusted by experience, preserved not because they were perfect, but because they were useful. Accuracy, in this sense, becomes something that survives quietly, even when its origins disappear. At the lower edge of the parchment, something less certain appears. Below the eastern coast of South America, another stretch of land curves outward. It is faint, almost tentative, yet undeniably present. It is not clearly labeled. It appears attached, yet slightly detached, resisting an easy name. Some have suggested this could represent the southern continent, drawn without the ice that defines it today. Others argue it is simply a distortion, an extension pulled out of alignment by projection errors and incomplete information. Both interpretations remain cautious. What lingers is not the claim, but the ambiguity. A map does not demand belief. It allows uncertainty to exist on the page. It preserves a question without insisting on an answer. As the parchment rests in the soft light, it feels less like a revelation and more like an echo. A reminder that knowledge does not always move forward in clean steps. Sometimes it circles. Sometimes it fades. Sometimes it survives only as a trace. Nearby, another map has been unrolled. This one feels more composed, more deliberate. Its surface is smoother. Its lines are cleaner. The world it presents feels balanced, as though disorder has been carefully edited out. The continents are arranged within measured oceans. Coastlines follow graceful arcs. Decorative elements are restrained. The margins feel calm rather than crowded. The poles are not left empty. At the bottom of the world, land appears again. It is vast, continuous, and confidently drawn. Rivers flow inward from the coast. Mountain ranges divide regions. The interior is not treated as unknown, but as structured space. Labels are placed with care, suggesting familiarity rather than speculation. To a modern eye, the outline feels familiar. But familiarity can be misleading. When this map was created, the southernmost reaches of the globe remained beyond direct observation. No expedition had traced those coasts. No instruments had measured those distances. Ice concealed whatever lay beneath. And yet, the map offers no hesitation. One explanation lies not in exploration, but in philosophy. For centuries, scholars had argued that the Earth required balance. Land in the north must be countered by land in the south. This idea of a southern continent appeared repeatedly, not because it had been seen, but because it made sense within a symmetrical worldview. From this perspective, the map records belief rather than evidence. But belief alone rarely produces such specificity. Another possibility is inheritance again, that this depiction draws from older cartographic traditions, filtered through time, altered by copying, but still carrying outlines that no longer matched lived experience. There is also the quiet possibility of coincidence, that modern viewers, accustomed to satellite imagery and precise outlines, recognize patterns that were never intended. That resemblance creates meaning after the fact. Even this explanation does not fully dissolve the unease, because the map does not feel tentative. It does not fade into abstraction at the edges. It does not mark the southern world as unknown. It presents it with the same visual confidence given to Europe, Africa, and Asia. This confidence lingers. It suggests a moment when cartographers filled the edges of the world not with warnings or monsters, but with land, with rivers, with structure, with the assumption that the world, even when unseen, could be drawn. As the lamplight rests quietly on the parchment, the archive remains silent. These maps do not argue their case. They simply exist. And in their quiet presence, the mind begins to slow, even as the questions grow heavier and more difficult to release. The next map is different. It does not invite the eye to wander across familiar coastlines or recognizable continents. Instead, it draws attention inward, toward the very top of the world, where most maps of its time offered only emptiness or vague suggestion. Here, the polar region is not left blank. At the center of the page, the North Pole is drawn not as a single point, but as a structured space. A dark central mass rises where no land had been officially confirmed. Around it, 4 vast regions extend outward, divided by long channels of water that flow symmetrically toward the surrounding seas. The geometry is immediately striking. The divisions feel deliberate. The waterways curve with restraint. The land is arranged with a balance that feels almost architectural, as though it were designed rather than discovered. This depiction does not resemble exploration. It resembles intention. The map was produced during a period when the far north remained largely inaccessible. Ice-closed passages. Extreme cold shortened journeys. Compass readings grew unreliable, and written accounts were often fragmented, shaped by exhaustion, fear, and uncertainty. And yet, the map does not hesitate. It presents the pole as an organized environment, not chaotic, not unknown, but structured, divided, and centered. At the very middle stands a mountain. It rises from the page as a fixed presence. From its base, waterways appear to flow outward, separating the surrounding lands into equal portions. The mountain is described as magnetic, a feature believed by some medieval and early modern scholars to influence compass behavior and guide the movement of water and air. This idea did not emerge from direct observation. It emerged from explanation. When instruments failed near the pole, theory stepped in. A central mountain offered a cause, a reason, something stable to anchor uncertainty when measurement could no longer be trusted. In this sense, the map becomes less a record of territory and more a portrait of understanding. Around this central structure, islands appear. Some are drawn faintly, as if remembered rather than seen. Others are more confidently outlined. Their names echo through older texts, travel accounts, and northern legends, where ice, darkness, and unending summer light blur into one another. Whether these islands ever existed in the forms depicted is unknown. What matters is that they were placed. The map refuses emptiness. This refusal reveals something essential. Cartographers of this era worked at the edge of reliable knowledge. They balanced reports, inherited texts, philosophical ideas, and geometric symmetry. Where certainty failed, coherence often replaced it. The result is a world that feels ordered, even when unseen. There is another quiet tension within this map. Its precision contrasts sharply with the technological limits of its time. No expedition had surveyed these regions in such detail. No instrument had measured these channels or confirmed this central mountain. And yet, the confidence remains. Some historians suggest that the map draws from older sources. Descriptions of a northern world divided by rivers and centered on a magnetic highland appear in medieval manuscripts, which themselves echo even earlier traditions. Others argue that the map is symbolic rather than literal. A diagram, a visual explanation of how the world was believed to function, rather than a claim about physical geography. These interpretations do not cancel each other out. They exist together, layered, much like the map itself. As the eye traces the circular lines surrounding the pole, the effect becomes almost calming. The symmetry encourages stillness. The repetition slows the movement of thought. There is no urgency here, no warnings at the margins, no creatures marking danger, only pattern, only balance. This balance suggests a worldview that valued order over emptiness, that preferred a complete and intelligible Earth to one fragmented by unknown spaces. In this way, the map reveals more about its makers than its subject. It shows a desire to believe that the world, even at its most remote, followed rules. That chaos could be arranged. That mystery could be framed within geometry. As the lamplight softens, details begin to blur. The mountain at the center loses its sharpness. The waterways blend into gentle curves. The land divisions become shapes rather than regions. The map starts to feel less like a document and more like an object of contemplation, something to rest the mind upon. It does not ask to be solved. It asks to be observed. And as attention rests on these repeated forms, the boundary between explanation and imagination begins to soften. Thoughts slow. The sense of time loosens. This is where the questions change. Not what is correct, not what can be proven, but what it felt like to stand at the edge of the known world and still choose to draw it as whole. For a moment, the archive feels especially still. If you enjoy these quiet journeys through forgotten history, you are welcome to stay with us by subscribing. The map remains open on the table. Its center holds, and the silence around it deepens. The next maps do not rest easily on the table. They feel unsettled, as though they were never fully certain of their own geography. Their lines hesitate. Their coastlines drift. The world they present seems to hover between observation and imagination. One of these maps introduces islands that no longer exist. They appear suddenly, scattered across northern seas. Some are large, some are small. Their names feel confident, even familiar, yet their locations shift from copy to copy, century to century. Sailors searched for them. Some claimed to see them rising from the mist. Others passed through the same waters and found nothing but fog and open sea. Reports contradicted one another, but the islands remained on the maps. Once placed, they were difficult to erase. This map draws from those uncertain waters. Its coastlines are fragmented. Islands cluster where modern charts show only ocean. Distances feel compressed, as though space itself has folded inward. Familiar lands appear displaced, rotated, or doubled. The confusion is not chaotic. It follows a logic of accumulation. This map was assembled from accounts passed through generations. Stories told by sailors who navigated by stars and memory. Descriptions filtered through translation, retelling, and expectation. Each retelling added weight. Each copy made the islands feel more real. Over time, repetition replaced confirmation. The map does not distinguish clearly between what was seen and what was heard. Observation and rumor share the same ink. Certainty and doubt sit side by side, indistinguishable once pressed into parchment. This creates a strange effect. The world feels crowded. There is no empty space left for uncertainty. Every gap is filled with land, with names, with possibility. Some historians argue that these phantom islands emerged from misidentified coastlines, mirages, or the shifting appearance of ice. Others suggest they reflect misunderstood encounters with real places, distorted by navigation errors and the curvature of the Earth. There is also the possibility that they were never meant to be precise, that the map reflects a time when geography was not fixed, but fluid, when the edges of the world shifted with each journey and maps adapted rather than corrected. The islands lingered not because they were real, but because they were plausible. As the eye moves across this map, it becomes difficult to trust any single feature. Land seems provisional. The sea feels thick, crowded with expectation. Nothing settles. Nearby, another map waits. This one feels colder. Its lines are cleaner, but its ideas are heavier. It does not depict known lands so much as imagined ones. Coastlines are drawn where none had been observed. Continents are suggested, then partially withdrawn, as though the cartographer could not decide how far to go. This map treats the unknown differently. Rather than filling it with stories, it fills it with theory. Land masses appear beneath oceans, traced lightly as if seen through water. The suggestion is not that these places are known, but that they should exist. That geography, like mathematics, follows rules that can be inferred even without direct evidence. This approach feels restrained, almost cautious. The coastlines are not bold. They are tentative, broken, interrupted by notes and dotted lines. The map does not claim discovery. It proposes possibility. In doing so, it occupies an uneasy space between science and imagination. It acknowledges ignorance while still attempting to shape it. Later generations would confirm some of these ideas. Others would dissolve entirely. But at the moment this map was drawn, none of that was known. All that existed was hypothesis. The effect is quietly unsettling. The map does not promise answers. It offers structure where certainty is absent. It suggests that the world, even when unseen, follows patterns that can be anticipated. But anticipation is not the same as knowledge. As the eye drifts across these speculative coastlines, the boundaries between land and water soften. The map begins to feel less like a record and more like a thought experiment preserved on paper. This is not proof. It is possibility. Together, these maps share a common tension. They resist emptiness. Where later cartography would leave blank space, they prefer to draw something. Islands, continents, theoretical shapes. They fill silence with form. This impulse reveals something deeply human, a discomfort with the unknown, a desire to believe that the world, even in its most distant corners, is already structured, already waiting to be understood. As the lamps in the archive grow dimmer, these maps begin to blur at the edges. The islands lose their sharpness. The speculative coastlines dissolve into suggestion. What remains is not geography, but intention. A record of how people once imagined the limits of their world, not as voids, but as places just beyond reach. The parchment absorbs the light. Shadows gather in the corners of the room. The maps seem heavier now, their questions sinking slowly into silence. Nothing demands resolution. Nothing asks to be carried forward. The mind is free to let these uncertainties rest, just as the maps themselves have rested for centuries, folded carefully, waiting to be unrolled again in another quiet moment. And as the archive holds its breath, The final reflections begin to take shape. As the final maps are returned to their places, something subtle begins to change. The questions that once felt sharp no longer press forward. They soften. They loosen. They drift slightly out of focus, as though they no longer require attention. There is no need to decide what is true or what is false. No need to measure accuracy or resolve contradictions. The impulse to explain begins to fade slowly, gently, without resistance. These maps were never meant to provide certainty. They were drawn in moments when the world felt wider than understanding, when knowledge moved carefully and imagination filled the quiet space between what was seen and what was believed to be possible. They remind us that maps are not only records of land. They are records of thought, of patience, of expectation. Each line reflects a belief held at a particular moment in time. Each coastline carries an assumption about how the world might be shaped. Each filled space and each deliberate blank reveals how people once imagined the limits of what could be known. Knowledge does not move forward in a straight line. It gathers slowly, then disperses. It sharpens for a time, then softens again. What feels impossible in one century becomes ordinary in another. What once felt certain can quietly dissolve, leaving behind only a trace, or a question, or a memory. These ancient maps rest comfortably within that cycle. They are not errors to be corrected, and they are not secrets waiting to be uncovered. They are moments preserved on paper, pauses in a long, unhurried conversation between human curiosity and the unknown. In their confidence, they reveal hope. In their hesitation, they reveal care. They show us that the past was not ignorant, only incomplete, and that our present understanding, too, will one day feel unfinished, viewed from a distance we cannot yet imagine. As these thoughts settle, the archive begins to dim. The lamps above the long wooden tables are lowered slowly, one by one. Light withdraws from the parchment, retreating into shadow. Ink softens. Lines lose their urgency and begin to rest. The room grows quieter. Hands move gently across the tables. Movements are unhurried, practiced, familiar. The maps are rolled with care, not forced, not rushed. Each chart is returned to its place with a quiet sense of repetition, as though this has been done many times before. Shelves receive them without sound. Leather bindings close softly. Wood responds with a faint creak. The room seems to breathe, settling into itself. Dust drifts and settles where the light no longer reaches. The silence deepens. The questions remain, but they no longer ask to be answered. They rest comfortably, without urgency, without pressure. They do not need to be carried forward into the night. Curiosity can rest now. There is nothing left to solve, nothing left to compare, nothing that needs to be remembered in detail. The mind is free to loosen its grip. You can let the images drift. The coastlines fade first, then the islands, then the speculative shapes that once filled the edges of the world. They dissolve gently, without resistance, returning to darkness. Breathing slows. The sense of time becomes less defined. The archive feels distant now, as though glimpsed through a half-remembered dream. The weight of history grows lighter, thinning, becoming almost transparent. These maps will remain. They will wait patiently on their shelves, folded into silence, ready for another quiet moment, another softened gaze. They have learned how to exist without explanation. And for now, you do not need to carry them with you. The floor feels cool and still. The air remains calm and unmoving. Nothing shifts. Nothing calls for attention. The doors of the archive close gently, without sound. The last lamp is turned low, then dark. The night continues, uninterrupted. You are free to rest. There is no expectation, no answer required. Only stillness, only quiet. And as sleep deepens, the world simplifies. Edges dissolve, thoughts slow. The darkness becomes gentle, and nothing more is asked of you.